Matt Thistlethwaite joins us. He's the Shadow Assistant Financial Services Minister. Matt, first of all, on APRA, do you think they get it, the fact that they need to change their culture? You look at the chair and the comments made by him in the last 24 hours, there's an argument that he doesn't necessarily get the changes needed at the regulator.
Well, Kieran, I think that many of the heads of these organisations do need to wake up and see that there's been a lot of concern about the way that regulations worked in the financial services industry. That was, of course, led to the Royal Commission. There's a lot of anger in the community about the role of banks and the regulators, and they want them to toughen up. And they want to see prosecutions where banks and financial institutions have done the wrong thing. And the Royal Commission pointed this out. The APRA Capability Review has pointed this out, and hopefully the heads of not only APRA but ASIC and other regulators now understand that the community expects higher standards and wants to see some of these prosecutions brought to the fore.
We've heard APRA say they need more funding. They've got $150 million more coming from the federal government. We've heard them say they're up against these behemoths of banks that have tens of thousands of employees. But, I mean, they're really highly specialised employees up against things like bank tellers and financial advisors. Do you think we're hearing a lot of excuses from APRA?
Well, I think there's probably no doubt that that some of these regulators could have done with more funding in the past. Unfortunately, the Abbott government did cut funding for ASIC. They later restored it after the cry that came from the community about what was going on in banking and financial services. But unfortunately, when you do things like that, you lose that expertise, you lose staff when the cuts are made, and you don't get those people back. And not only APRA but ASIC have suffered from underfunding in the past, which I think we're now waking up to, and we need to make sure that they are properly funded, they are properly resourced, that the people that they're bringing into these organisations have the necessary background to launch the prosecutions and to regulate properly and to lift standards in financial services. We all want to see a confident and well-working financial services industry, but we haven't had that in the past, and we need to be aware of that. And that's why it's important. We think that the Royal Commission legislation should come into the Parliament immediately, and we get on to legislating and providing the necessary funding and the necessary backing for these organisations to do their job properly.
The Sydney Morning Herald's reporting a number of your colleagues saying that the franking credit policy shouldn't be scrapped entirely. Susan Templeman says it's naive for anyone to think the underlying reality, the cost to the budget, will just go away. Graham Perrott says the need to do something, the hit to the budget has not gone away. I'm sure the Treasurer is very aware of that. And Ed Husic as well has made the case that he respects the strong feelings that are out there, but at some point the public's going to ask the question, can we continue to let this scheme grow at the rate it is? What's your view?
Well, Kieran, this policy, like all of our policies, will be reviewed in the wake of the election, and I think it's healthy that Labor MPs and members of the community are having input into the policy review, particularly on an important policy like this. Given what occurred yesterday with the revelation that Dick Smith, a very wealthy Australian, receives $500,000 in cash refunds for franking credits each year, and he didn't even know about it and tried to return it through his accountant and couldn't. If someone like that thinks it's preposterous, and the fact that that bill for the government, if you like, will grow to $50 billion over the course of the next decade, it's certainly reasonable for us to be saying, well, we need to have a look at this policy. We need to also, of course, balance that with the fact that the government ran a very effective scare campaign. I was involved in the House of Representatives Economics Committee that looked at this issue. They ran a very effective scare campaign. These are all the issues that we're going to have to balance during that review, but I welcome the contribution of my colleagues and indeed members of the public on this issue.
Surely there's a middle ground between Dick Smith getting $500,000 a year in franking credits and the pensioners who all turned out at the ballot box who have worked their entire lives. They're not trying to take money back from the government. They're trying to use that little bit of extra cash for their lives and their families. What is your personal view on this?
Look, I want to assess the evidence. I want to see what the review throws up in terms of community consultations and the views of Australians. As I said, I was involved in the House of Representatives Economics Committee, and many did put the point of view that they thought that the policy was unsustainable, but that there should be a limit on it. In other words, a cap on the amount that people could receive as a cash payment every year. There are all the arguments that we need to assess in the review. I might point out as well that pensioners were excluded from our policy, so pensioners weren't affected by it. But there were many self-funded retirees who were on modest incomes who were to be affected by that policy. And that's all of the issues that we need to assess and balance those with wealthy individuals like Dick Smith. It was a fact that 85% of people who were affected by that policy had over $1 million in their superannuation balance. It's up to us as a party to work with the Australian public and assess whether or not a policy like that is sustainable into the future, given that we have to properly fund aged care, health care, education services, and we've got an ageing population.
Maybe there is that middle ground that Annalise referenced on another matter where there's a lot of bipartisanship, and that is on the bush and the drought. It was interesting, Daniel Andrews, when he was seeking election back in 2014, travelled all around Victoria, had this Labor Cares approach, really wanted to show that he was listening to local, regional communities and got the vote accordingly. Does Anthony Albanese and your team need to do that, listen to the likes of Joel Fitzgibbon and others to try and re-embrace the bush?
Yeah, we certainly are conscious of the fact, Kieran, that we do need to embrace the bush, that Australia is more than our cities, and that rural and regional communities contribute a hell of a lot to not only the Australian economy but to our society. And we've got a great heritage in Australia of bush communities making that contribution. It's a community that's struggling at the moment. We're facing the most severe drought in the last 100 years. And I think it's important, and it's great to see that Anthony's taking a bipartisan approach to this and working with the Prime Minister today. They're visiting rural communities as part of a tour and listening and hearing what people have to say. And that's something that Labor will be very, very conscious of in the review of policy and the review of our approach that we're undertaking in the wake of the election.
Matt Thistlethwaite, thank you so much for your time.
Great to talk to you guys.